Welcome. My name is Dan Turner. I'm head of programming and outreach for the Georgetown County Library, and we want to say thank you again to Tom Santopietro, who just does a wonderful job playing us in on piano. Yeah, let's give him another round of applause. Every time he does this before every first Thursday, he shows up an hour ahead of time, so you can come and just enjoy these wonderful creative improvisations, and every time there's something new. So he integrates new songs, but he also, even when he plays the same songs, they sound different. They're always, so it's all good. And Tom will be back tomorrow. He plays first Thursdays. He also plays an hour ahead of time. We have the classic film series starting tomorrow afternoon. The film kicks off at 2:30, but Tom will kick off playing piano at 1:30. So come enjoy the sounds and then the vision afterwards. And we'll have Jimmy Stewart starring in Harvey tomorrow. That's a great film, great classic film. So come join us again tomorrow. And we want to say thank you to Aaron Brickle. That's our videographer back there with the. It's a small camera, but it packs a punch, and Aaron does a great job. He videos these presentations among a lot of other work that he does. You can check out his work, his videos for the county and for the library on the Georgetown County Library YouTube channel. So if you want to review this presentation, Joy Brown will give us a lot of information, so you might want to go back and take another look, and she's got a great PowerPoint too, so take another look at it, or there are lots of other videos up there. So check out the Georgetown County Library YouTube channel for some great programs and other videos for events across the county too that Aaron has done. So we appreciate him being here too. And thank you, of course, to FOWL. This is the Friends of the Waccamaw Library. They're wonderful. They support this event and all our events, really, all our programs, adult programs, children's programs, teen programs. And Carol Leiss is here. She provides for every first Thursday coffee, tea, water. So help yourselves to those refreshments in the back as you see fit. But we appreciate Carol doing that for us and our friends in general. So if you're not a friend of the library, please join up and help their volunteer efforts. All right, and today, first Thursday to kick it off here, Happy New Year, Happy 2023. But we've got a great kickstart with Joy Brown. So from the Nature Conservancy, wonderful organization here in South Carolina. Joy Brown, and I had a longer introduction, but Joy snatched it away from me, and she edited out some of her, wonderful titles and accomplishments. So we'll respect her wishes, though. She's done even more than this, so try to keep it short. Joy Brown has a master's degree in biology in coastal zone studies and over 20 years of experience in marsh ecology and restoration throughout the southeastern United States. Since joining the Nature Conservancy in 2008, Joy created its marine program, which evolved to focus on using nature as the basis for marsh shoreline restoration projects. Since 2015, Joy has been working with local communities to mitigate flood impacts using nature. Joy is here today to talk about new nature-based approaches for building coastal resiliency across our area. So please welcome Joy Brown from the Nature Conservancy to learn more.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan. Good morning, everybody. I appreciate the invitation to come and speak with you today. Before I get going, I just want to mention for anyone that maybe did not see, I brought some flyers, so hopefully there's enough for everybody. But there's two flyers. So one is the bigger, broader North Coast Resilience Project that I'll be talking about. And the other flyer is one of the outputs of that effort. So one of the on-the-ground projects, the Boyd Living Shoreline Project that's in Georgetown. So I'll speak to both of these, but there's also some fun stickers and pens. So please help yourselves. And I will go ahead and get started. So today I'm going to talk about this multi-year partnership that we've had with Horry and Georgetown counties and the resulting on-the-ground projects from that partnership. And I want to talk about the process of how we worked with community members to understand the issues, and then we also worked with the municipality staff to bring in these nature-based options. So for some, that was a new way of thinking. Some had been maybe thinking along those lines but not used those terms before, and that's totally fine. And so we always want to think, is there an opportunity for a nature-based potential solution? There's going to be times when there's not, and then there's times where there's a mix of both. So our South Carolina chapter of the Conservancy has a goal of working with communities to create more resilient places for people and nature in the face of climate change. And the majority of focus today will be on flooding, but one project, this Boyd project, is a bit more solely focused on shoreline stabilization. But first I want to see who in here has heard of the Nature Conservancy. Yay! I love to see that. Also fine if you have not. The Nature Conservancy is a global nonprofit with international and U.S. chapters with a mission to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. That's a lofty statement. In an effort to develop a strategic plan to support the world's human population, we have developed a set of conservation priorities from the global down to the state level efforts. So our conservation agenda was developed with the intent of securing food and water for humans in light of the expected 9 billion people on Earth by 2050. Our mission is to conserve the land and waters on which all life depends, with a vision for a world where diverse life thrives and people are conserving nature for animals and humans. The Conservancy has a presence in over 70 countries and in every one of the 50 states in the US. So our conservation strategy was developed at that broader, big, global scale. And in the table you can see on the screen, you can also see these, you can see the North American strategies here. All right, so those strategies were used to shape our priorities. And what happens is within the organization, we kind of set these global North American strategies. We also set our state level strategies. And then the intent is that the state level strategies feed back up into these bigger, broader efforts to show our vast amount of impact. Okay, so speaking of the South Carolina conservation strategies, this is a map showing that information just to give you a broad sense of how we have, I am focused mostly in the coastal area. So not just directly on the saltwater, sand area, but in the coastal area. But our strategies do stretch throughout the whole throughout the whole South Carolina state. And there's a list of them here on the side. So what I will be talking to you today is really going to be bucketed under what we're calling resilience and adaptation. All the work that I'm going to be mentioning today falls within that. So we've been working in South Carolina for over 50 years, and the Marine program was established almost 15 years ago when I came to South Carolina, and now I'm happy to say we have a staff of 3. Woo-hoo! Well, one's a Marine intern, but that's cool. She does great work, and we work her a lot. So our focus today will be on the resilience and adaptation work we've completed to date in partnership with Horry and Georgetown counties. I don't have to tell you where that's located, but for some folks, I do show this so that they get an idea. And we selected the North Coast, Horry and Georgetown counties, I'll refer to as the North Coast, to work for many reasons, but to list a few, at the time we started this project, there wasn't much attention that we saw in this field up in the North Coast. We saw a lot of effort down around the South Low Country and around Charleston, but we felt like there was a gap. We had a lot of existing partners up in these counties, so we felt like there was a great opportunity to work with those partners and even expand that relationship. There was a great existing amount of nature left up in this area to work with so that we can try to conserve what we have and utilize that moving forward. And then we saw this opportunity where we felt there were many underserved communities that weren't getting some attention or weren't even applying for federal funding for many reasons, but maybe we could help support bringing in more funding to some of those communities as well. And so the North Coast work started in 2016, and we've not stopped since then. So the green indicates actions that have been completed. Yellow means in progress. So as you can see, we've been in funding and implementation since 2018. And we kind of knew that's how that was going to work. But what I really want you to notice on this slide are the pink stars. So they indicate like major named flood events that have been experienced by these communities. Things like the 100-year storm in 2015, Hurricane Matthew in 2016, Irma in 2017, plus others. But what's not up here is that there were communities that we work with that were having flooding events and people were having to move out of their home for a period of time every 90 days. So it's not just big named storm events. We know downtown Georgetown has issues on the king tide with flooding. So there are other issues that are at stake that aren't just these big named storms. So the way we went about this was in 2016, we kickstarted the project with a public meeting. And the meeting was well attended. There were community members, there were elected officials, there were state and federal partners there. And at that meeting, we asked the attendees to identify their top priority need, and their need based on how we were looking and resilience issues was flooding around rivers, is how that kind of worked out. And so from that original group, we developed a broad representative group of folks for 10 people that we called a steering committee. So then we were able to work with that steering committee in 2017 where we did some online training and then actually got together in person and developed a work plan. We did this at a regional scale. So where South Carolina brought people from Horry and Georgetown County in the version of our steering committee, there were groups from communities in Georgia and groups from communities in Florida. So we all went through the same process and then we developed our own work plan. So it was in a form of like a boat. So, you know, like what are maybe some of your issues that could stop the process, like an anchor? What are some of the issues that could propel this action, like a motor and a propeller on a boat? You know, those kind of things. Who's on board? Who's on the boat? Who needs to get on the boat? So we all went through the same process, but we developed our South Carolina specific plan for Horry and Georgetown counties. In order to move it forward, we came out with some goals. There was really an interest to better understand localized flood risk. At the time, there were a lot of maps showing either on a state level or a regional level, and so the people on our steering committee said, you know, we want it down to like the neighborhood level, okay? They wanted to identify opportunities to use nature-based solutions. That's part of the reason we were there. And we wanted to provide these shovel-ready project ideas. And then the Nature Conservancy actually wanted to implement at least one project in those communities to help provide, you know, a pilot. And so our first action was to hire a consultant to create that updated kind of finer resolution flooding maps for the two counties. And then we put that information on a publicly available website. Those are down here. And then we took that information back to smaller technical groups in each county we wanted to put circles on a map. We want to say, show us exactly where the issues are. Where can we think about where there could be some solutions we could discuss? So first, I'm going to take you through the updated flood analysis that was created. Now, this started back in 2016. So when we talk about future flood risk, 2017 was on there. But that was something that at the time, we really wanted to get a pretty close picture and then also think about, you know, something a bit further out. So geoscience consultants, Kyle Smid, he used to work for NOAA. He's from Charleston. He knows the whole coast. He knows the whole state very well, and he's a really smart guy. So he helped us map out these things. So in doing so, he started with updating digital elevation models. So as fine a scale as we could at that time, you wanted that elevation to be as correct as you could possibly get it. So I think that was between 2 and 5 meters. And then he created a land cover. So that's basically like color coding everything that through, using satellite imagery and that elevation. And then he mapped out past flooding events. So those past flooding events, I believe, I don't know if I list them on there, but they were from, I think, Joaquin, Matthew, stuff like that. So then he took all that information and started looking at what does future flood potential look like? What is the % chance every year that certain areas would flood? And so then he did that for 2017, 2035, and 2060. And so when we mapped out the information, like I said, this is the publicly available website, the Coastal Resilience website that the Nature Conservancy has. Then the data that he mapped out was on this mapping portal. But then there's also a project section on here, and in that project section is where we put those notes from all the public meetings that we held. Kyle actually wrote up how he created the analysis. We put that on there. And there's other resources and links to other partners and other resources listed on that project's page as well. And I believe they'll keep a copy of this posted somewhere so that if you want to go back and see these, thank you. They're also on the flyer that is in the back. So I'll share one example. So this is downtown Conway, and this is near the courthouse and the Riverwalk over here. And so just to show you, this is the land cover. So again, color codes things. River, gray is buildings, green is vegetation. These are parking lots. This is waterways. And so from that, then he looked at, again, those digital elevation models. And this was a past flooding extent. So this was from 2015 from Joaquin. So the lighter blue is showing like the shallower level of flooding, so around 1 centimeter. And then it goes all the way to the darkest blue, which gets up to about 11.5 feet. Of course, there's going to be some really deep here in the river, but you can see some of these areas. And if I switch back, and then you just kind of pay attention maybe to this area, you'll see how the change, comes up. So that's the flooding that happened in 2015 with Joaquin. And then this was 2016 with Matthew. The same, lighter being shallower, darker being deeper. And then when he did the prediction for 2060, the lighter blue is again the lower end. So, but at this point it means the lightest blue means there's a 1% chance of flooding that year in those areas that are light blue, all the way to the darkest areas, which gets you up to 100% chance flooding that year. So again, the river's over here. Of course, there'll be water in there, but you can see some of these areas. And we do know that there has already been some flooding in the courthouse parking lot before. So it's not necessarily, this is not like what people think of the 100-year event. That's the % chance that year that it would flood. And so that chance just increases. And this is the highest extent because it's the 2060 event. But you can look at all this on that website if you'd like. So when we took that local flooding map information, we actually pulled together smaller, more technical focus groups. Was there anybody in here that participated in either the community meeting or the smaller focus groups? No? Okay. So that was in 2018. And so we went to Georgetown County and had a smaller group, and then we went to Horry County and had a smaller group. And that's where, like I said, we wanted to bring out these flood maps, and we wanted people to draw circles on maps and say, and this is where there's flooding, this is what we think the problem that's causing the flooding, and then we wanted to think about what some solutions might be. And the output of these meetings are in that projects tab on that website if you want to see the meeting minutes. And so the top 3 communities that were identified out of all of those community meetings were the city of Conway, the town of Andrews, and the city of Georgetown. And so that's where we wanted to move forward with making better relationships, having a better understanding of what the actual highest priority flood needs were, where they would like us to participate in some effort, and then talk through what maybe are some of the future steps that we could help with. So the first project that kind of resulted, an on-the-ground project that resulted in that effort I'm going to talk about is in Conway. So this is Sherwood Forest. This is the church. A lot of people saw that got flooded up to its windows. It kind of sits on a little hill, so it's higher than a lot of these places around it. But this sign actually says those are floodwaters back from the 90s. That's where floodwaters got to in the 90s. So this area has had issues and been flooded out. So actually the homes that were in this part of the neighborhood were actually purchased through a FEMA repetitive flood initiative with the city. And so part of that effort is that you have to take all structure off of that parcel, and there can never be another formalized hard structure there again. It has to stay green because of the flooding issues. And so what we did is we got together with the city staff and the community, and we actually had a meeting at the church, and we asked people to come in and tell us their flooding concerns, their flooding impacts that they had experienced, and kind of some of the amenities they wanted to see. And so that's where this project was, that's how this project was developed. So it's based on a Carolina Bay, which is a natural occurrence in South Carolina, especially up in this area. And so they designed this, it's basically like a stormwater catchment. So there are some deeper areas that could potentially be fished. And then there are, this yellow is more of like a walkway. So the idea is that there could be a walkway incorporated in there. And then there is the potential to have a play area that could be utilized by the community as well as the church. And then there is kind of an earthen berm to help keep some of those floodwaters away from the church in future flood events at a certain point. At a certain point, they would go over it, but people should not be there at that point. So this project was designed with a Carolina Bay as an inspiration. And if you follow the little walkway up here, it goes up a little further, and it actually connects up here to the road. And so then the pink star just notes the same place. So what you see here in this picture is, this is the road that comes into Sherwood Forest, Sherwood Drive. And this is normal conditions. So Joshua, who is actually created Robinson Design Engineers, who we worked with, he's about 6 foot tall. So you can see that there's about 6 feet at normal conditions in Crabtree Swamp, where the water level is versus where the bridge is. And so actually Adam Emmerich with the city sent me this picture that following December. That was just a serious rainstorm that caused that to occur. And so in this image, you'll see this is Crabtree Swamp. This is an existing trail system they have on the other side. So our project would come up and connect here. But another thing that would happen is this shows the past watershed, how the water would flow from Crabtree Swamp. So Crabtree Swamp, for those of you that don't know, is kind of a rainbow arc-shaped area that was dug by the Army Corps of Engineers to drain tobacco fields. Of course, since that was done, there's a lot more water going into Crabtree Swamp than I think was originally intended. So when they dug it, if you can imagine, the thing came this way. So when they dug Crabtree Swamp, all they did is they took the dirt out and they just put it on the side. Took the dirt out, put it on the side. So it does make this very high shelf off to one side of Crabtree Swamp. And so that really channelizes the water and makes it flood worse. So what we want to do as part of this project, and the city will actually handle this part, is they want to open those connections back to the floodplain to let that water spread out. There's nothing here but trees, nothing here but trees. Let that water spread back out like it would have normally done. And then the other thing they want to do is actually punch a hole under Sherwood Drive. And then there will also be some of this water that'll flood back to that Carolina Bay inspired catchment that I showed you a minute ago. So that's the first project. And actually this project is one of the finalists right now for a new federal funding source called BRIC, Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities. It's a FEMA program, and it's got a lot of money in it. And so this project and one in Mount Pleasant are the first two from South Carolina to be in that finalist. Pretty sure they're going to get it, but there's been no paperwork signed yet. But that'll be great. It'll be the first BRIC funding coming to the state. It'll also be, this project is a wholly nature-based solution that it will be funding, and we find that to be very exciting. The next project is in Andrews. So this was a project where we were in partnership with the town of Andrews and Georgetown County. And so Georgetown County applied and received FEMA funding to conduct a hydrology and hydraulics assessment of the town of Andrews. That means they wanted to see, how does the water move into the town, how does it move out of the town, and how does it move around the town? Where were the issues? Because Andrews does have a lot of flooding issues. One of them is that they only have 2 stormwater outfalls, one in the north and one in the south. And so one of the projects that were identified to immediately move forward with is to create a 3rd outfall. And that 3rd outfall is actually noted here, this space here. And it drains this about 118 acres. So it will support it improving quite a bit of an area of Andrews with their stormwater issues. But the H&H assessment that was done actually highlighted 13 projects that the town could do in order to improve their stormwater issues. And our process, our involvement, the Nature Conservancy's involvement in this project was that the county applied for the funding, but then they needed the local match. But the town of Andrews didn't have the bankroll to do that. So we found the funding and we put up the local match so that we could have a seat at the table. And this is great, but this is what we would consider a holy gray solution, but it was necessary, it was needed. So we wanted to do something in Andrews that we felt was a bit more nature-based and had the opportunity for community education and participation. And so we actually found some private funding to do rain barrels and rain garden programs, where we installed a couple of those around Andrews. We did that in partnership with Clemson and the Sustainability Institute. They have a Environmental Conservation Corps. They're a young group of, it's kind of like if you've heard of AmeriCorps, you've heard of that? It's kind of like that. It's like similar to AmeriCorps program. But anybody in here not know what a rain garden does? Okay. A rain garden is a landscaped depression that allows rainwater runoff from impervious areas such as rooftops, driveways, and compacted lawn areas, the opportunity to infiltrate and be absorbed, reducing the stormwater runoff and associated pollution. So this is just a little diagram here. So the idea is that you can catch some of that water and let it kind of settle out through like a vegetated area. And then when it's not wet, there's also plants that will be able to survive that would be habitat, you know, for birds or butterflies or things. And then the rain barrels, same idea, catching water that comes off of the roof. So we installed 2 rain barrels and 2 cisterns. So for a 1,000 square foot roof with 4 gutters or corners where the rainwater is collected, a 0.4 inch storm will fill a 60-gallon barrel. For a 1 inch storm on the same rooftop, it'll generate 623 gallons of runoff. So by taking some of that water that's going to come off the roof and holding it for maybe watering the rain garden later, that's something that you can do to help reduce your stormwater impacts. So in April, we worked first with the Andrews High School, and this was actually some of their slower learning students that came out. There were multiple classes that came out and helped, and so installing the rain garden here with these plants very near the school, very near where all the buses drop off the students, and then painting these rain barrels that we installed later to get some of the water. This is a very large building, and a lot more water comes off these roofs than these 2 rain barrels can hold, but it's a start. And then in May, we went and actually did a community event at the library. So they actually had a couple of rain barrels that were old and were not installed, I think, correctly, so they had not been functioning. So this is where we installed these cisterns, and that's these things. So they hold, I think, something like 600 gallons. So there are 2 cisterns that were installed, and then we installed the rain garden with the community. And they actually ran pipes, just very shallow, over from the cistern to the rain garden. So when it's not raining, it can help keep the plants watered. But the vegetation that's selected normally is meant to be able to thrive in a lot of water for a short period of time or no water if needed. So that was Andrews. So the third project I'm going to talk about now is a project that we've not installed yet, but we're in the process. So this is in Georgetown, downtown Georgetown. and it's called the Boyd Living Shoreline Project. So this is the second flyer you have back there. So this, like I said, unlike the other two, this is a bit more shoreline stabilization focused than purely like stormwater focused. But it does have benefits to this property and to the community, and to maybe protecting this eroding shoreline that if we don't do anything, could potentially just go away. So the project is called the Boyd Living Shoreline. It's named after our major funders. That's the Darnell and Susan Boyd Foundation out of Columbia. There's, you know, a small island out of Columbia on the river named after the Boyds. They have quite a few things, I think, around the museums. You've probably seen their names here and there. But this is the first time they funded something down on the coast. So we are very excited that they would work on this opportunity with us. And there's a website also on the flyer, but nature.org/Boyd Shoreline if you want to keep up with the project. So project goals being to really look at that shoreline stabilization, reduce the erosion at the site, design a project that would mimic a natural healthy marsh, and then providing that marine habitat. We do know that there are folks that fish over there quite a bit, so the idea of trying to make a place that the shrimp and the crabs and the fish want to come to, you know, and hopefully bring in birds. People like to go watch birds. That's the kind of thing that we're looking for here. Multiple benefit. So we have multiple ways that we're working on outreach in the community, but you know, this is a picture of how we would have done community outreach in the past. Maybe we go to a church, maybe we go to a library and we ask everybody, come on in. But we started this project during a pandemic, and so we could not do that. So we started a program that we're calling Community Ambassadors. So our intent was to try to be very intentional and representative of the whole community and get folks that would come in and bring us input on our project, but that could also share information about the project with their neighbors or people that they work with or go to church with, so that they could get the information back out into the public. And so now I think we're going on 40 community ambassadors. So this is an open invitation to anybody, always. If you want to stay updated on the project and you want to help share the information, we'd love to add you. You just let me know. So we've done this in a few different ways. We do have a website that we've created. It was on that first slide about this project. But we did actually put out signage around the park, in Morgan Park, and I'll show you where that is in just a minute, where we did actually create a community survey, because before we ever thought of what the design might be, we wanted to know how is the community using this park area. And we wanted to make sure that what we were doing wouldn't completely counteract what was being used, how it was being used by the public. But we've also done things, presentations, and like I said, we're really heavily relying also on those community ambassadors to help spread the word. So our timeline, like I said, started in 2021, where we hired our engineers, we got our website going, we started on that community outreach effort, and we conducted our baseline monitoring. So we contracted with Paul Gaze and Keith Walters, from Coastal Carolina University to do that monitoring. And then early in 2022, in January 2022, we submitted our permits for the project. We continued some of the baseline monitoring. So Coastal Carolina is doing things like physically, what does the site look like? They're doing that in a few ways, where they take scanners on boats, they take handheld scanners, and they're getting elevation and trees and where trees have fallen. And then they also use drones with LiDAR in them to get that kind of picture elevation information, and then looking at things like water quality. So we've got some sensors out in the water that Paul's put out there for us. Like, what does this look like? What does the bottom look like under the water? You know, those are the kind of things. What is the composition of the sediment? We want to know, like, what is maybe the weight-bearing capacity of the sediments, right? So I know from working up in Winyah Bay, it can look sandy, but you could step on it and sink because it's muddy underneath. So we need to know, is that the situation we're looking at? And then Keith went out and was looking at what animals are out there, because we are hoping our project increases habitat value. So he did some netting, and if any of you have been down to Morgan Park, you will know that there are gators. So some of those nets brought in a buffet for some of those gators. So some of the fish we didn't get accounted for, but we did get a nice selection of what was out there. So we'd like to see how that's going to change. So in 2023, we're here. We anticipated having our permit. We put it in a year ago. We still do not have our permit, but I will say there is a new living shoreline permit for South Carolina. We were trying to slip it in under that, and slightly it does fit, but our project is a lot bigger than, say, a private property owner would probably do. So we've thrown DHEC a curveball. So they've taken a little longer than we anticipated. So the idea is that as soon as we get our permit, we will start construction, and we will be hiring a marine contractor, but we also want to work with the community to help us install portions of it. And then once we install it, we need to do another monitoring with CCU. That's the last funding we have for them. My hope is to get them kind of on the line and get them hooked so they continue to take their classes out there for years. So, and we can't afford that continually, but at least maybe they'll have an interest from an educational perspective to do that. So this is where the project is located. This is Morgan Park, so there's a little map up here. So if you go to the end of Front Street, Main Street up here, there's the larger East Bay Park, and that's where there's a boat ramp, and there's bathrooms, and there's disc golf. Everybody know where this is? Yeah. Okay, cool. So then if you come down and you go over to the side, and there's a gravel parking lot, then you can actually walk out to the water, and that's where Morgan Park is located. And so there is this kind of observation platform is what we're calling it. I call it stairs to nowhere or ramp to nowhere. And then there's kind of like a pole barn picnic area that you can go out there. And we do know that folks do come and, like I said, fishing. The mayor told us she goes out on a golf cart and has happy hour out there. So, you know, that's the kind of thing that happens. And then some people just kind of come upon it from out of town and just walk out there. And so what you see in this drawing is, so this is the Army Corps channel. This is their setback channel. So when we originally were looking at the project area, we had allowed to look at the whole area around the peninsula here. This side is very, very deep. There's an old, what appears to be a bulkhead. We didn't want to get into trying to remove creosote pilings or any of that kind of mess. So we went to the other side. It is very shallow. The channel does come way out here. And then this green eye shape. So this is our 1 acre project area that we're working within. And within that, you'll see this dotted line and this dark blue line. So the dark blue line is where the low water is now. That's the mean low water line. The dotted line is where the shoreline was in 2005. So this is a technical term, a bite. If you can, it looks like Pac-Man took a bite out of that shore. We do know that this is, like I said, an actively eroding area, and that we're trying to reduce the erosion, stabilize the shoreline, but also make it habitat friendly. So these are some of the pictures. We do know that we see things like, you know, these trees, a lot of tree stumps, trees that are falling. We see these eroding marsh edges with this underscore of the sandy shoreline. And so the things that we've come up with, the conclusions after looking at data and talking to local experts, our Robinson design engineers came up with, you know, we know that it's an eroding area. We do know that it can accumulate sediment. There's a lot of sediment coming down those rivers. We just have to put something in there to slow it down and hold it in place so we can catch that and keep that there so the erosion doesn't keep occurring. Boat wake is one of the biggest issues. So the Georgetown Harbor, of course, is up in here. And one day I was standing right around here, and they'd had the, I don't know, Georgetown fishing, some kind of large boat fishing. Classic? Is it called? Okay. So, and it was the last day, and folks were coming in, and they were coming in through here, and it is basically, it's making waves like you would see almost during a small hurricane, just combating. Even just on a regular day, there's quite a bit of boat traffic coming through here. So again, boat traffic is one of the biggest things. There's energy coming at this site though from 120 degrees. So there's boat wakes, there's, you know, during periods of storm, there's a lot of water coming down the rivers that the project will have to deal with. And then there's also this direct wind-driven waves coming across, and that's what's making that telltale bite shape. And so we know that this is partially due to the loss of vegetation. There's nothing to hold that sand in place. So the idea is to dampen that energy, promote the deposition and holding of those sediments, and then allow for that natural process to come and help support that vegetation to come back and hold those sediments in place. So this is how we proposed in our permit to do it. We'll see what they let us do, but this is what we proposed. So it's a three-prong approach, and so I'll talk a little bit more about each one, but just to give you an idea, again, the observation platform, the stairs to nowhere, the picnic area, and then that beach with some of those trees that we see that are dying. So along that low water line that I showed you, where that shoreline was in 2005, the idea would be to put in wattle fencing that kind of extend from the edges. Then we would have a series of what we are calling gabion baskets. The idea of having, like, it's basically like a metal framed basket that you could either put live oysters, oyster shell, coquina shell, rock, something like that inside of it. That's really going to bump up that value for the fish to come in, and the shrimp and the crabs. And then the major breakwater activity is out here furthest, where there's a series of pilings that we would likely weave something wood-based in the bottom. That is kind of the first line of breaking down that energy. And again, like I said, because it's kind of at 120 degrees, it makes kind of like this semicircle. So these are the three elements. So starting back at the shoreline, the wattle fence, you can see a picture of an example here. This is kind of like thigh to like hips height of a wood-based material that you secure in place. That's where we hope that the vegetation will grow down to and into. An example of gabion baskets, and then showing this series of pilings. This is a project from North Carolina with the idea of maybe having some woven things down in the bottom. That again is going to be kind of that first line of breaking down energy for those waves coming into the site. So that's all I have. I'm happy to take any questions folks may have for me. Yes, ma'am.
Once you get the permits established, what's the timeline?
Depending on what they allow us to do. Right now, we've had no insight on if they're even going to let us do what we have proposed. So if they let us do what we propose, we anticipate we could potentially have construction completed once we start within 6 months. But like I said, there's going to be a piece that the marine contractors will do. So we want them to install those pilings, and they will put the gabion baskets out. But we want to work with Carvers Bay High School, has a carpentry program. We want them to actually build the boxes. And then we want the community to help us install the wattle fencing. I don't want anything that the community has to get in the water because of the gators. That's the marine contractors. So at a minimum, within 6 months of go to stop, we anticipate having those pilings in. But then the rest of it, and then the gabion baskets, but then the rest of it might take a minute to do a volunteer event, up towards the shore. But we're not exactly clear on what they're going to let us do yet. So we've not laid that out fully. Yes, ma'am.
Have you tried to get no wake zones, or at least slow?
No. So like I said, the channel, the navigation channel goes pretty far out, but we do know boats cut in through there, but normally they're like smaller, like I've seen John boats and stuff, and I know I've seen a sailboat out there before. So because I think it's part of this bigger, broader channel, we've not anticipated asking for no or slow wake, but the channel's so far out there. So even the people that, would probably impact our project directly more by coming closer into shore on that side are going to be smaller boats, because the bigger boats can't make it in there. It's too shallow to get right beside it. But the ones that are coming up into the harbor, there is a slow no wake area, but it's further up in there, but we've not asked about extending that at this time. Yes, sir.
Have you anticipated objections that DHEC might have to your project design?
We've had 4 pre-application meetings, and the objections they've told us that they would have of concern are, and they say in general terms, they're not directly talking about our project, but they say the things that they want us to watch out for is entanglement. So doing nothing that would cause entanglement of mammals, sea life. So we couldn't use anything like lashing with metal cables or anything like that. We're not planning on doing that. The Army Corps has told us it has to be navigable, meaning a person in a kayak or a manatee has to be able to move freely around the site. We've allowed for that. They are concerned because there's never been this amount of wood used in South Carolina, how long the wood will last. There have been projects done in other states, but nobody ever wants to hear that. So the idea is that we would look at funding that we would reserve for maintenance, and then allow observation of the project to see maybe when do we have to put some more wood into the wattle fence, or maybe when do we have to put more wood into the bottom of the pilings. That's a question we can't answer for them because nobody's done this kind of wood-based project in South Carolina yet. But those are the kind of things that they said to watch out for. And their major thoughts were, it's the intent of the project. So it's still considered a living shoreline project because we are trying to stabilize the shoreline, but also provide this habitat value. So we've followed, I think, their direction that they've given us, but we've got no direct feedback since they got the permit from them. The Army Corps has already issued our PCN, so. Yes.
Just to follow up on the wattle fence, I got the impression that it would almost be self-sustaining, wouldn't it?
Well, it's not meant to last forever, right? It's meant to last until the vegetation kind of comes out, and then it would secure itself, you know, and so we don't want that wattle fence to be there in 200 years. We want it to be there long enough for the vegetation to get, you know, acclimated and grown back out. Yes, ma'am.
That's a weird question. You're doing a piece. Are you looking at how that piece is gonna go outward? You know what I'm saying?
You mean like how the project might expand?
Yeah, and what impact that would have on the piece next to it, the piece over here? Maybe?
Sure, always, yes. So part of it is gonna be that sediment flow downstream. And so as that starts to come in and slow down and get held in place, that will elevate the sediment levels so that we do hope to see more vegetation along that kind of shoreline section. We don't anticipate the breakwaters of growing. There is hope that, I mean, it's pretty fresh now and we get big pulses of fresh water, but with sea level rise, what does it look like if that place gets saltier in the future? So there is hope that maybe one day there could be oysters there. And that could potentially grow out. But mostly it would be that vegetation along the shoreline that we're hoping to expand and grow. And that's, we have projects, I didn't put any in here, but gold bug project that we did down in Mount Pleasant by the Ben Sawyer Swing Bridge. We didn't plant any vegetation, but we did put in a project and seeing that vegetation move in closer to our project significantly, like 75 to 100 feet closer, and fill in. And so that's what we're wanting because the marshes are kind of where the money is. Like I build oyster reefs, but that's, if you imagine like a cupcake. The oyster reef is kind of like the icing. The main good dense part is that cake. That's the marsh. That's what we want to make sure is healthy as we're seeing we see in sea levels rise, and we're having erosion issues. We want those marshes to be really healthy. Did that answer your question? Okay. Yes, sir.
Locally, we've had the problem with the beaches. Is the Nature Conservancy looking at that also?
We don't really work in beachfront. We have had staff that sat on the Beachfront Technical Advisory Committee. When was that, 2005? 2015? 2015 maybe? But we don't normally work directly on the beachfront. So my work is really more focused on the coastal estuarine shorelines, and then we have some other priorities on the offshore. But the beachfront has not normally been something that we directly deal with.
How many, do you have facts and figures on the islands that have disappeared in the last 100 years or so?
Not directly. The most information I am aware of that I've worked with is around Cape Romaine and how they've mapped the eroding islands within Cape Romaine. But I do know that Raccoon Key has disappeared since I've been here in Cape Romaine. But I don't have that number for the whole coast, but it's probably something I could help you find if it exists. There are a lot of people looking at beachfront things, issues. So if you know, and it might be one way you might find it. Have you looked at the governor's floodwater commission report? There is a beachfront section of that. That could potentially be in there. I don't know. I've not read that portion. I wrote the living shoreline part, but there is, I believe, a beachfront section in there. So that could be the first place you could look and see if there's something.
I grew up near the Chesapeake, and a lot of the islands are gone.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and like I said, likely that, you know, as far as Cape Remain in South Carolina is concerned, they do put a lot on the damming of the rivers to not allow the sediment to come down the Santee as part of the reason that they've seen the erosion of their islands. But it also is partly because we are losing some of that vegetation from erosion, and it's not keeping that sand in place. Yes, ma'am. Oh, wait, hold on. I've already had one for you. Sorry. Let me go one more over here.
Kind of a two-part partnership question. I was wondering, as part of the North Coast Resiliency Project, are you partnering with the North Inlet Winyah Bay NEAR?
Yes.
They're part of that?
Yes, they have been party to all of our meetings. Yes, to all of those meetings. They were in those and helped to drive some of the information that we had. They were on the steering committee that we developed. So, and we continue to work with them now.
And are there specific personnel or departments that you work with within Georgetown County specifically?
The county. So mostly, so we started out working mostly with Sel, and when he left, we started working more with Art Baker and their grants folks, because those were the people directly tied to that Andrews project. We work a bit more with Georgetown City staff because of our Boyd project being at city property. But it was, initially it was Sel and those folks, Public Works kind of. Yes, sir.
Can you go back a slide, maybe 2, to where you have the lists?
This one?
No, go back again.
That one?
Yeah.
Okay.
To me, number 1 and number 2 seem to be in conflict with each other.
On the design approach or up here?
Eroding and accumulating sediment. One's gaining, the other's losing.
Yeah.
What's meant?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. We did have a professor from CCU say, I find it interesting you're doing a shoreline stabilization project in an area that's accumulating sediment. In fact, what he meant was there's an area that's receiving a lot of sediment. Like I said, the issue is there's sediment coming down the rivers, but it's not staying. So that's why we want to put things in there to slow that sediment down and keep it in place. And that vegetation will help keep it there eventually. But because of the erosion right now, it's not doing that. So yes, I know it says accumulating sediment. There's a lot coming down. There's a lot that is available. So that means we don't have to truck sediment in from somewhere else. So there are a lot of projects in North Carolina where we see them truck sediment in and like make a gentle sloping shoreline, and then they plant it. We don't need to do that. It's a
Follow-up question is, all of the islands and shorelines that are eroding, at one point, everything that's in place, like the oceans, the rivers, accumulated those islands and made them. Why all of a sudden, why in the last 50 years or whatever, are they eroding instead of building up like they had been for thousands of years?
yeah. So
Ocean islands are eroding now, but the ocean put those islands there through natural things. So what's changed?
well, so there can be sea level rise impacts happening. So water's getting higher. There can also be a lot more human activity. So specifically, like I said, this area has a lot of boat activity, and I feel like that is one of the main drivers. Like I said, if you watch this area, it feels like it's being impacted by mini storms almost monthly instead of, say, every 5 years or something. So I believe that those are some of the main drivers at this site in particular. Okay? Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm going to get in a little bit more general. Horry County is one of the fastest growing counties in the country. And we know who the enemy is, it's us. And I'm wondering, after the Florence flood, which was basically water that had no place to go because there's so much tarmac throughout the county, you know, throughout wherever there are people. Is there, I guess what I'm asking is is there any kind of concentrated movement to get more pervious driveways?
Parking.
User-free parking lots. Obviously it's not good for highways, but where some kind of rain, high water absorption that nature normally provides, is there any kind of movement that the Nature Conservancy is trying to create so that happens? What I'm thinking about is, I live in Rose Inlet, and we're so lucky. I happen to live on, my backyard is a conservation district for Collins Creek. The water rose on Collins Creek, I'm guessing close to 10 feet, if not more. It was amazing to watch it come up because of all this water that hadn't been absorbed, on its way down from, on the Waccamaw. So I guess, is there some kind of general, let's start making nature work for ourselves inland too? I apologize for not, I didn't have time to think about asking this question precisely, so I apologize.
That's okay. Yeah, so a couple things. We have conducted a study just above Conway to see the value of areas that were in conservation and say, what if those were then developed and what kind of flooding impacts would we have? So we have values associated with conserved areas and noting how they helped to, it could have been worse, right, if those areas would have been developed. The other thing is we have moved what we're calling this North Coast project, resilience project. We're looking at other communities between this area and North Carolina. And the idea is that, again, we are focused a bit more on some of those lower income, underserved communities. But now there's a lot more partners involved in this space now. So we're at this point trying to figure out what is everybody doing. We did a 2-year research project where we tried to figure out some ways that we could move forward that we want to share with all those partners and see if that means that then we are boots on the ground more, spreading out into more communities, or is that some of these other organizations that are here? And so that would hopefully help with some of these kind of projects I've mentioned, get more of those on the ground. And then the other thing is, we've been doing this ever since I've been here, is trying to figure out how you make that impact connection between South Carolina and North Carolina. Because a lot of the waters we see coming down, we can even be flooded after a storm that just hits North Carolina. So what is the potential that there could be investments made to help the people in North Carolina, maybe with conserving more areas, or what are the opportunities there? That's been a very hard nut to crack, but we're trying. So we do things like working with Association of Mayors, the municipality governments, and trying to make those connections. So we do have, like I said, we start North America down to states. So we do have what was called the Southern Division. That's being led by Mary Conley. And so that she does things like that. Like, how do we drive multi-state initiatives to look at these bigger, broader watershed pictures? So we're looking at those things. It's not been something, I can't tell you we have the answer right now, but it's something we've been working on for almost 20 years. So I think really it's going to come down to some major significant contributions that are cross-state, and I've not seen that happen yet anywhere. Water doesn't know it's going across the state line. So,
just as a sidebar, this area the library is on is a drainage area.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go look at the pond, the big pond in the back of the library, that is a conservation effort.
Mm-hmm.
So before you leave, go check out the pond.
Nice. And yet there is going to be at some point some things we cannot do to avoid any impacts with some levels of some storms. Because, like you said, a lot of South Carolina is low on the coast. So, yes, sir.
Georgetown County's in the process of revising their comprehensive plan.
I heard that.
Yeah, for a number of years now. And the next element that's going to be debuted next Thursday is the resilience element. Number one, they contracted that out to a group called the St. Bernard Project. Are you familiar with that?
I am not. I am not.
Number two, could you just maybe throw out the top 2 or 3 things that should be considered in a resiliency area?
So some of our other priorities do deal with looking at, so as you may know, we have a new Office of Resilience for the state. And so one thing they are doing is they are trying to write their own plan right now. The hope is that we can get them to write a plan that considers resilience and nature-based solutions and all of those things in it, so communities could have somewhere to go to get inspiration. Sometimes maybe it's even a copy and paste and do what we see happening there. So we're trying to get a seat at that table to do that. At the same time, we're looking at states and counties and municipalities doing their hazard mitigation plans, their comprehensive plans. And so when we actually were working on the original North Coast stuff that led to that Conway, we actually provided language to Horry County when they were writing their comprehensive plan and said, these are the kind of things that we would like to see in there. So thinking about, not always just going to the tried and true stormwater pond, gray infrastructure solutions, but thinking of, are there natural opportunities to look at projects that, and now there's so much money out there, I think, that's couched under what they're calling resilience and adaptation, that kind of funding feels real. When we started those conversations, it didn't feel real. It felt like we were hard hunting for that money, but now it feels like there's bigger buckets. So I would definitely think of putting out things like that BRIC program I mentioned. So it replaced a FEMA program called PDM, pre-disaster mitigation, where people just used to apply to that to get money to write their hazard mitigation plan. Now there's so much more in there, and they've made the category so much more broader that communities can be looking at how can they prepare before a storm, not just how do we respond after something happens. But that's another good point. Put things in there. When something like, okay, we know this is not working. If it gets messed up in a storm, let's go ahead and figure out how we might replace it after a storm when that money is coming fast and furious. And then we could go ahead and have some plans in place where we could change that and not just put it back the way it was. So those are some of the things that I would think about, is actually listing out funding sources. If there's any way to put in there that you want to put money towards, pre-planning, and the closer you can get to a project being ready to go, shovel ready, the better. If there could be some funding to drive that kind of stuff and say, we know that we need this in this area, this in this area, we want to change this if it gets impacted, that could go a really long ways.
So the county's been reaching out more of late on some of these new elements and trying to get more public input and making revisions to those elements, which is a positive thing, I think. Would the Nature Conservancy be willing to review that resiliency element for Georgetown?
Sure, and we've put that out, and I'm going to be made aware of the date of the meeting, and we're going to try to get somebody there, but we can also have those conversations outside of that meeting and say, hey, we'd like to, because we've helped other communities do that, so. Good. Feel free to spread my name if you know somebody in there.
I got your card.
Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with the PD River Basin Council?
I am familiar. I do not actively serve on it, but I am familiar with it.
Does anyone serve on it?
We do not, I don't think, have anyone from that, unless it's David Bishop, but we are included in the Upper Waccamaw Task Force, which is a separate effort, but there might be people from that sit in on that other group and make people aware when things are happening.
I'm on the PD River Basin Council.
Okay.
And we've heard from North Carolina, and they have 2 dams on the PD, that when we have all that flooding, they were at capacity. They had to let water go. There's nowhere else for it to go. And I don't know what the answer is going to be, because we had a storm here. I live on the Waccamaw River, and we had a storm here about 3 or 4 years ago where there was a lot of rain in North Carolina that just flushed down. We didn't get the rain here. And, we were going to have these 9-foot floods and stuff, which never happened. We had maybe a foot more water in our backyard than normal. But I don't know how you're ever going to control the water coming down the PD system, which is, the Black River and the Waccamaw River. They all join to the PD and go to the Waccamaw Neck. We're looking at a 2-year project.
Yes. Yeah, that's big. That's people. We would help hire people that have bigger, broader ideas than I do. But it would take. Yeah, it's just like I said. It's a nut we've not been able to crack to even get people to really try to think about what could legitimately be a project, like putting money up towards that. You know, to really get somebody in to try to come and study. Has the PD River Basin ever done that?
No, they're funded by DNR, but they
Okay.
don't have that kind of
Okay.
money. And they're by design, they're not looking at flooding.
Okay.
They're looking at having water available for people, for drinking water, for industry,
Okay.
as a resource for everybody is their primary goal,
Yeah.
and what to do in droughts and
Yeah, I think
et cetera.
Eric Krieger from our office did a very similar effort down in the Savannah. And now I think he has been starting to look a bit more in the PD, but I'm not aware of his work that he's been doing more recently, so.
Yeah, the state's divided up into 7 different systems, and they're all gonna make a plan,
Yeah.
which seems to be a secret, nobody knows.
Water use is a big topic in our office.
There's a lot of work going on that nobody knows about.
Yes, ma'am.
So the project that you showed, will that help with South Bay Park flooding?
South Bay Park.
Or the-
Oh, East Bay Park? We are not saying that that's a flooding project. That would take a much bigger, broader effort, and even thinking about something on the other side, which I said we are not planning to work in because of the depths, the creosote pilings and the Army Corps Channel that's over there. That would be something bigger. So what happens is if you want to build out a lot of marsh, yeah, you could look at it, but we're not saying that the 1 acre is going to help reduce the flooding. Yeah.
Because it's very wet and it floods.
Yeah, and well, even in the people's houses that are, right there by the park.
Yeah, and then the gentleman was asking about pervious versus impervious paving. That's something that I have been trying to get for years, to get our county building department to require that. And in case any of you don't know it already, you don't matter, builders and developers matter more. It's more expensive to have pervious paving and sidewalks and parking lots and what have you. And the county's interested in tax revenue, and they don't give a you-know-what about what happens to us.
Isn't Publix?
Yeah, I was gonna point that out, Publix parking lot, the actual roadways are regular paved surfaces, but the parking spaces are pervious.
It feels
Nice.
different on the feet.
Yeah. Well, and there's also an opportunity for places, like big box stores where maybe not their main parking areas, but like where they consider the overflow that you get like at Christmas or whatever, they could make a portion of that because every piece you make that could help absorb whatever.
Houses and condominiums and apartments and.
Yes,
where
yes,
they're paving
yes,
everything.
yes. Yeah, but it definitely takes some initiatives. And so something we're doing, like with the Living Shorelines, is going to the Association of Realtors and really trying to push to them the opportunities that exist for property owners if they're having eroding shorelines. Or if they're selling a property that already has a living shoreline behind it, to make sure the new property owner is aware. Don't go out and build a five slip marina over this or something, those kind of things. So.
Okay, and then in Merle's Inlet, you said you're not doing the shoreline, the ocean shoreline, but how about in Merle's Inlet?
I've never done a project up there. I've been up there numerous times, mostly through Keith Walters inviting me up there to look at a couple of different project areas, but we've never been able to make anything work out. But I have spoken to the folks at Pawleys Island and Litchfield and, there's another one, I can't think of what community, about the new living shoreline permit, what their opportunities are. So I'm always available to have those conversations. I've just not found a project that worked directly for us at the time.
Well, what's happening there that's concerning me is that the stormwater department is directing stormwater runoff from highways and parking lots and, into the waters of Merle's Inlet, which is an active oyster.
Yeah, a harvest area.
And if they keep it up, it's gone.
That marsh, that Merle's Inlet marsh is unique. It's probably one of the most valuable natural occurring marshes
Mm-hmm.
in the world.
Well, I do know there was that Merle's Inlet 2020 effort that started, but my understanding is they're not active right now. But DNR did then try to promote more shell recycling. So I've seen DNR and Coastal Conservation League recently did an oyster project up in Merle's Inlet, but I don't know exactly where. But I feel like DNR is starting to kind of move back up into that area for those resources that they have not been in for a long time.
But you've got the county diverting stormwater into the inlet.
Yeah, and they're about to put a big pipe out into the ocean, right? I saw the core thing come through for that, and I was like, oh wow, that's big.
42.
Yeah, it's a big pipe they're putting out there. So
That's what we need.
yeah.
There's a lot of groups in Merle's Inlet, but also in other areas, and one of the things that I think about is that there's all these disparate groups that are all thinking along the same lines. How do you marshal all of that into a unified effort to achieve the same?
I think it's a constant question that we're always asking ourselves, but that's part of what I was talking about, our North Coast resilience effort. Like, are we going to continue doing something in these communities where there's so many more players now? We are just at a point where we're trying to figure out who's doing what right now. So we are planning to have a bigger, broader meeting this year where we can figure out what is the next steps, who's doing what, where's the best place to work, those kind of things. Other than communication, people have always put up like tools or databases, and those are great, and they feel like they last for a couple of years, but then they kind of fall off. But I really and truthfully, at the end of the day, it's just talking to everybody and understanding what everybody's doing. It takes a lot of time, though. Yes, sir.
To his point, there are all of these groups, and they spend a lot of time and a lot of energy, and they come up with great plans. But where we're missing the boat, and this is what I want someone like the Nature Conservancy to help, it's who gets elected onto the lawmaking, the state and the county. We gotta get political. You gotta stand behind people that want to adopt what all these groups come up with.
Yeah.
Because the current Georgetown County Council in Horry County, they don't give a damn about anything that we're talking about or these other groups
Yeah.
are talking about. We've got the wrong members in there, and somehow we gotta get away, we gotta get into politics.
Yeah, we have to be very careful. We are a very large nonprofit, and we have very strict rules and regulations that we have to abide by as far as like government relations go, because we can easily lose our 501c3 status, and that would be horrible. So we have very strict rules about what I can even do when it comes to election time as an employee, meaning by no way can I endorse someone while I'm wearing a TNC t-shirt, So we may not be the right ones, but maybe that's something like SELC. Coastal Conservation League plays a big role in elected officials, and giving them like report cards.
People elected, it's just
Yeah.
gonna do the same thing over and
Yeah.
over again. They just
Yeah.
ignore it.
Yeah.
Let's do, how about one more question, we'll let Joy off the hook.
Okay, I just wanted to let people know I've got a petition here opposing the gas station development in Litchfield. If you're interested in supporting that effort, I can get your signature.
Well, thank you for your time. I'll stick around for a couple of minutes if anybody has any other questions.
Much. And thank y'all so much for coming out.